From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Alexis, codename Doc Holiday Jackson. Most importantly, you are here, and that makes this stuff they don't want you to know. It's the top of the week, which means we are bringing you some hopefully very strange news. A little bit of Florida Man, a little bit of Twilight Zone meets the X-Files with a dash of the Lone Gunman, is how you would describe it to a jaded Hollywood producer. So our stories were a little bit difficult for us to determine in this week's segment because so very much has happened. You know what I mean? Gone are the days when the news cycle would dedicate a whole 2 weeks to something. So we're going to do our best. We may have to, in later episodes, introduce a segment that I'll pitch to you guys later. But for now, our journey takes us to the realm of big tech. Our journey takes us to the murky world of international finance and to the reaches of outer space. We talked a little bit off air, and we decided we would start with space and then work our way back to earthly things. That sound good to you guys?
Wonderful.
All over it.
Very well then, I'll do the honors. It turns out that in a move I can only describe as classic human, we may have just found evidence of life off of Earth. At the same time, we're doing our level best to destroy life on Earth.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's a very, very human thing.
Well, even if we're not even trying, it's still happening.
This sort of comes naturally. We've come honestly by our destructive powers.
And whether through accident or design, of course, I think I may have mentioned this on an earlier episode, within the last 50 years, humans have destroyed 2/3 of animal populations in various biomes across the planet. Things are looking dire, and it doesn't matter whether or not you support the World Wildlife Fund. This is just math. There are no opinions involved. This story takes us to Venus. The news broke fairly recently. On September 14th of this year, scientists announced a mystery afoot on our planetary neighbor. They discovered something called phosphine in Venus's atmosphere. They did not, importantly, claim that they discovered extraterrestrial life. It would be the biggest news in the history of human civilization. I read the paper. What I like is they spend a large amount of time trying to prove how it could be anything other than a sign of life. So phosphine, that's what they found. They found phosphine in large amounts that are very difficult to explain without microbial life somehow being the cause. Of course, the news took this and ran with it, saying, life on Venus? I don't know, question mark.
Or life on Venus. We found it.
Right.
Well, like, Ben, correct me, isn't Venus one of the ones with like the super toxic atmosphere, or like, as far as like if you're actually on the surface of the planet, but then the upper atmosphere is sort of similar to like Earth's atmosphere in the way it's made up? Maybe correct me if I'm wrong.
There are some commonalities in the atmosphere, and this plays a big role in our investigation today. So if phosphine, first, let's figure out what phosphine is. Then let's figure out where it happens, which you're right, it is in the atmosphere, not on the surface. And then let's figure out what this might mean to humanity if we make it to the next season of this insane endeavor that we have set ourselves upon. So phosphine is not cool for you. It's not something you naturally want to hang out with. It's colorless, it's explosive, it's flammable, and it smells like garlic or decaying fish. Small amounts of this stuff naturally occur on Earth as organic matter breaks down.
It reminds me a little bit when I was reading about it of methane, just enough of some of the properties that it has and as a byproduct of chemical biological processes.
Yeah, exactly. So here on Earth, on our little hunk of rock, the only source of phosphine is microbes. It's a gas often associated, in fact, with feces. So shout out to everybody who wrote in or found me on Twitter and started telling me about the question, who are we farting inside of? I think it's a great question.
You need to get a hold of the T-Public folks for that one, man. I think that needs to be like a hoodie of it at the very least.
Or maybe Ice-T will get to it at some point. We'll see. But the fascinating thing here is that we have a mystery up. It's like a cosmic murder in a locked room. We don't know how this phosphine occurs. We can't immediately assume it indicates life on Venus, but we are having a very difficult time explaining how so much phosphine could be created if microbes are not involved. There are a couple things. There are a couple of what I'll call the womp womp calm down points. And the number one womp womp calm down point is that we don't know a ton about the geochemistry of Venus. It's our nearest planetary neighbor, but we rarely visit it because it's not a neighborhood for humans.
Yeah.
It's a weird street for us to walk down.
Yeah, one of the major things is the average temperature on Venus, right? That could pose a bit of an issue for humanity. Right now it's a little chillier than it has been for a while in Atlanta. I think it was 55, 56 degrees this morning. That's Fahrenheit, of course. On Venus, the surface temperature there is going to be around, 800 degrees Fahrenheit.
And it's the atmosphere is the densest of what are called the 4 terrestrial planets. So not a gas giant like Jupiter or something. If you make it down to the surface of Venus, you're going to be in an environment with about 92 times the sea level pressure of Earth. So it's not a place where we can easily survive. It looks like a gas giant if you look at it because it's surrounded by such a soupy atmosphere. And there's an interesting genre of planetary exploration and astronomy here that has a lot in common with forensic science. We are trying to reconstruct through thought experiment and through various observational tools what these planets may have looked like in the past, right? Like liquid water was discovered on Mars. There's a pretty convincing argument that once it flowed much more freely. The argument in regards to Venus is that once upon a time, Venus itself may have had some sort of water that was later swept into interplanetary space. But anyway, the big womp womp point is that we don't know enough about Venus to say that there's no way phosphine could exist without some form of what we recognize as life. The second womp womp point here is that we don't really know what we would do next if we found that if, again, it's classic human that we discover a new life form through its poop, but we don't know what we would do necessarily if we found it. Because think about this, one of the last things you would want to do is to introduce some new life form like this to Earth life forms. We've seen the dystopian sci-fi. We've all seen Outbreak, right? This could be the very last plot twist of the 2020s.
Well, it's sort of like the equivalent if you brought like an invasive species from another country, and let it out, like starlings, for example. That was a horrible misstep by that one guy that really thought starlings were beautiful, and he essentially overpopulated Central Park with them, and then it became like a real problem. But this would be like that on like a cosmic level, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison. it's strange because, it's the Holy Grail. It's like a secular Holy Grail, the idea of finding life. And it's tremendously difficult for us to be, as a species, as objective as possible. There have been so many near misses. There have been so many close calls. I mean, experts are still debating about the Viking lander experience in 1977 and saying, well, maybe they did discover some evidence of once upon a time life on Mars. At this point, there is a lot of science to do. This is one of the most important questions in the big game of the human species, and it'll probably be so for a while because it's expensive. It's expensive to figure out what the hell is going on in Venus. I thought you would like this, though, guys. I wanted to save this before we move on, just so you know. There's a plot twist already. Dmitry Rogozin, who is the director general of Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, like Russia's NASA, he recently came out after this announcement, by the way, and declared that Venus is officially a Russian planet. And it's because Russia, or the USSR, was the first and only nation to date to successfully land anything on Venus. They went through the atmosphere. They went to that brutal surface of the planet. Their technology did not last long, but they're taking that as a win. So,
yeah.
Wait, does that mean we own the moon then? Is that how it works?
We planted a flag there, baby. But no, there are treaties against that kind of thing.
They roundly ignore treaties.
Right. I saw that. I saw an article about that too. Actually, it was on Fox News, where it's interesting. This is the first time I'd seen this, and you guys may be aware of this moniker for Venus. It's sometimes referred to as Earth's evil twin. Which makes the idea of life on Venus even more interesting. What if it's like Bizarro Earth, where like everyone there is like a weird, evil mirror image of Earthlings? I don't know. I'm just getting sci-fi with it. Why not? Really interesting though. What an odd flex though, Ben. I see your point. Like, do you think it was literally in response to, we'll better go ahead and stake our claim since there might be life. Let's go ahead and bring this up and get the debate started. I don't know. It's a little odd.
Of all the superpowers that existed in the time of early exploration, USSR was the one sending, as you said, Ben, metal and money towards Venus to try and get some kind of data from the planet. And as Ben said, all the stuff that they did send there ended up melting and getting crushed almost immediately. Like if you sent down a standard metal container down in the ocean 3,000 feet, the thing just would crush at some point. That's what happened to all of their money and efforts. But they did get a few images back, or a few bits of data back with one of them that were very, very important. It's interesting to think that Japan right now has the only functioning observation status of Venus with I forget the name of it, but it's got a satellite that's going around it right now.
Right. Here's the time where we finally get to say it. Coincidence? I'm kidding. Yeah, it probably is coincidence. But it may not be the last note I'll leave us with here is that this may not be the only satellite exploring Venus. I mean, certainly it won't be if we stay alive long enough to send more stuff. There's one interesting paper that came out on arvix.org earlier, and it proposes what you could think of as a daredevil mission, something called the Calypso Venus Scout. And the idea is to use a balloon in Venus's atmosphere. And in a layer of Venus's atmosphere is probably, if we had humans there, it would be the most likely place for us to make our own kind of sky city or landing base. The Calypso Scout is just a proposal at this time, but it's quite an intriguing one. The idea is that it would hang 20 miles below, or 32 kilometers for the rest of the world, below this balloon floating in the clouds. And it would be able to provide revelatory information such that if we could get this thing onto Venus, then we would probably be able to answer, definitively answer whether or not there was or is something that we would consider life. Notice, astute conspiracy realists, when I've been talking about this, I've been saying something we consider life. We have a sample size of one.
Right. Yeah,
I
don't know the story behind the naming of like all the planets. I know they're all named after like, Greek gods and Roman gods, but I will say, based on the description of Venus and the weird love triangle that existed between Venus, Mars, and Venus's husband Vulcan, who was like the god of metalworking, I think they kind of got it wrong. I think they should have named Venus Vulcan and then named some other planet Venus. That's just my opinion, because there's all these volcanoes there. The temperature, the scientists have described it like hell, Mars isn't like that, and it's just red. I know Mars is god of war, but I don't know why Vulcan got left out of the mix. Vulcan's such a cool, fiery god. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It didn't get left out. It was an entire species. Is that correct? Or entire civilization on Star Trek?
There is a planet Vulcan. You're right. That's exactly right. Yeah. I think we need to, who do we write to about renaming Venus? The time is nigh, guys.
Well, we have to remember human names for things, while they may seem permanent now, whatever now is, they're very much ephemeral, right? Because Venus is visible without technology. You can see it with your unaided eyes if you are patient and avoid light pollution. Venus is mentioned in one of the oldest surviving astronomical documents in civilization. People in Babylon were talking about it before the idea of this Greco-Roman mythology even entered the fray. So I would say you could write to someone. You could also just wait and see what the next iteration of humanity names these various planets. Because honestly, I feel like we should stick with Uranus. I think it's funny, and I don't think we should rename all the planets, especially the good pun-worthy ones. Give or take Jupiter.
Completely agree, Ben.
It's Uranus, guys. Come on, grow up.
That's still funny too, bro. That's still funny too. Yeah. It sounds like pee-pee. Just putting that out there,
Uranus. Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
It's actually even worse. It's pee-pee and butts.
Well, let's remember the human race is a team sport. So maybe when we're renaming planets, we can call that other one our anus. Moving on. we have some more strange news for you after a word from our sponsor. And we're back, not just from the ad break, but from space. You see, a lot of things are happening on Earth as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sort of a blip in the timeline of all things, but yeah, here we find ourselves in a pretty interesting section of the blip. Let me ask you guys, have either of you yet seen the new Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma?
Yes. Yeah.
I have not.
I'm not a fan of the dramatizations.
Yeah, they're a little cringy, but I enjoyed it. Enjoyed is maybe a weird word for it, despite those. And I do recommend that everyone check it out. I actually watched it with my daughter, who isn't that bad of a social media junkie. She mainly messes with the TikTok and maybe story for another day, but she was thrilled when the company ByteDance made a deal with Oracle. So TikTok is no longer canceled. There was a brief window where it was like, okay, TikTok's done. You can keep it on your phone, but it's going to get slower and slower and slower as you can't get the updates and all that. But we're not talking about TikTok today. We're talking about Facebook, which is a big part of this movie, The Social Dilemma. It's all about how these designers use psychology to game our brains and our brain chemistry into, craving that device or craving that feedback or that dopamine hit. They literally design it using these concepts, the same kind of concepts that a casino would use to make sure you keep pulling that lever, even when you refresh your page, you're swiping downward, right? And you're hoping that you're going to get a little treat maybe if you do it enough, something will change and you'll be, given a little tasty morsel. Or be like with the casino, one-armed bandit, maybe you'll get like a jackpot. It's all about like the thing that might come, and it keeps you on the hook. But another thing that the film talks about, and that we've talked about plenty on the show, is just how much division is sowed with the way something like Facebook uses its algorithms to essentially create this echo chamber where it's serving up information to each side of a big issue. Let's say Republican and Democrat. Each of us, if I'm a Republican and then my mother or a friend or colleague is a Democrat, we're getting different stuff on our Facebook feeds. And 9 times out of 10, we're getting served stuff that's feeding our own confirmation bias and making us feel good about ourselves so that we stay on the service longer and longer and longer so that they can collect ad dollars and learn more data about us as we feed in more clicks into the system. Another thing the film talks about is the way this can be used to literally sow division to the point where it actually becomes manipulation of things like governments, of elections. We found out about all of that in ways that can be used for good with things like the Arab Spring uprising and using Twitter to literally proliferate real information about things going on the ground. Great. That's a great example of this stuff working for good. But then we've also got examples of Russian bots gaming fake news articles and targeting people using that algorithm who maybe are already on the fence and distrustful of a certain party, and used that technology to not hack. This is not people hacking Facebook. This is people using tools that exist in Facebook for a purpose to essentially convert people's hearts and minds. And it just came out through another disgruntled Facebook employee. We talked about another one recently when it came to Facebook policing fake news and Republican bias, et cetera, or right-wing bias, et cetera. This one comes from a data scientist who was fired very recently, and before she was fired, released a 6,600-word memo that talked about how Facebook has blatantly ignored political manipulation from around the world. Not just in the United States, but in places like Brazil, where like Bolsonaro was elected in what many have blamed on this very same kind of division that's sowed using Facebook. Because in Brazil, when people get a computer or they get a new phone, like Facebook is the internet. That is the internet to folks in Brazil for the most part. That's how they conduct their business online. So this young woman, her name is Sophie Zhang. Went through and outlined her grievances about how they know about this stuff that's going on, but they don't typically do anything about it. Or when people do raise the red flag, they're shut down. And that was largely why she claims she was fired. Gentlemen, what do you think about this? This is something that we've talked about already, but it just seems like more and more of this information is coming out that Facebook isn't really doing their due diligence and trying to shut this stuff down. And we're seeing these ramifications really affecting our lives and politics and big things, not just sharing cat pictures.
I'm reading an article here from the Verge that's talking about this issue, and there are a couple of quotes in there from Sophie, the person who was the whistleblower essentially on this. And there are several different things in here that you've already expressed, Noel, but one thing that Sophie herself was expressing is that there are not enough human beings who specialize in this stuff working at Facebook to actually enforce the company's rules or to even take action against people who are, doing these kinds of manipulation pieces or political propaganda or whatever you want to call it, or however it manifests itself. That's one major issue.
Just the skeleton crew nature of like people actually whose job it is to target these kind of activities, Matt?
Well, because how could you run something like Facebook with so many millions of users and police it without largely making it automated? I mean, it would be impossible, I think, and I believe that's what they've found over years and years. And in order to make decisions about what is propaganda versus what is a genuine political ad, or that is Ben, I looked to your expertise a little bit on this just because it feels like the gray area that exists within anything that could be considered political is going to be very difficult for an algorithm to decide if it is fact-based or manipulated, being manipulative in some way, because at the very heart of anything that's going to be put out in that way is going to be purposefully manipulative, whether it's to get your emotional response, to, confirm your biases and all those things.
But all of that content most of it is doing that in some way. The way the algorithm works is to manipulate us into staying on the service longer. So how could they even flag, oh, wait, this is being manipulative? Of course it is. It's all being manipulative. Maybe I'm misreading what you're saying, Ben. I really want to hear your kind of bigger picture political, Pandora's box of like how this really figures into like international affairs and this as a tool of manipulation, and whose responsibility is it to shut it down?
Yeah. So I've got like 4 points. So the first, I think you did a pretty solid job referencing the dopamine science in that is explored in The Social Dilemma. But I want to point out, before moving on to the other 3 points, I want to point out that everyone exists in a bubble. Something like Facebook or social media may exacerbate the extremities of that bubble and may accelerate the timeline of how this radicalization, and it is radicalization, occurs. But we have to remember, without social media, by listening to this show, by creating this show every week, we are in a bubble of our own. I think anybody who listens to stuff they don't want you to know, especially our big data episodes, would be hard put to genuinely say they were surprised by anything explored in a film like Social Dilemma. But with that being said, I do believe it's an important film. To the second point regarding the tipping of the scales, right? The curation through algorithm of a Facebook feed, that's absolutely incentivized. Everything Facebook is saying, in my opinion, this is only my opinion, about mitigating the dangers there, is entirely lip service. And quite frankly, at the very least, it's misleading. There's a lot of money here. Don't forget Cambridge Analytica. You know what I mean? Don't forget the vast chasm between the power of a private entity like this and the complete lack of liability they have for the consequences of their actions. I would say that in this case, what we're looking at is a disincentivization from ethics, from exploring the truth. Facebook, like HSBC, a little bit of foreshadowing there, has no real punishment. The Mark Zuckerberg is never going to get in legal, like criminal trouble for anything. What's going to happen is that the fees or fines they will be confronted with will be folded in, as we've said numerous times on previous episodes, into a cost of doing business.
Well, and they're also always like offering to just police themselves. You know what I mean? Like they always present a solution that they will also be the architect of. So it's really hard. There's no real oversight because it takes government so long to catch up to this technology. They're saying, oh, it's okay. We'll just be good and police ourselves.
Yeah. Which again, entirely misleading at best. The next point I would make, though, is social media is not going away. The net would have to crash. You made a salient point about a phenomenon that's been continuing for the better part of a decade now, which is across the world, the majority of people who have an internet connection have it through like a mobile device, right? And many of those people who are entirely reliant on this mobile device are buying sandbox things, loss leaders at a great discount. Facebook wants you to have a Facebook phone. Google wants you to have a Google phone, just the same way that Apple wants you to have an iPhone, because then they can rent seek and they can take a cut of everything. Like, remember I think Fortnite got in a fight with Apple over their iOS and how the payment works out. Facebook is doing the same thing.
There's also another one that was like happening where it's like a vendor that's basically, it's like a game company. Maybe it's the one you're talking about, Ben, that's essentially has its own ecosystem. And because the App Store vets individual developers, they're essentially barring this developer from the App Store. So you're right. It's all about proprietary ownership and like saying, no, you can't play in my sandbox. It's my sandbox. And that's what Facebook's trying to do here.
Yeah, agreed. And not to put too much pressure on Facebook, because when we were first talking about this story or looking at it off air, everybody's first question shouldn't be just tell me more about this leak and how it applies today. It should be, oh, which leak is this?
Mm-hmm.
Is this the leak from 2019? Which leak from 2019 is it? You know what I mean? It's a sieve, it's not watertight by any means, because the employees at the individual level are perhaps going to practice their own form of ethics. This should be scary because there's an enormous kaiju-sized badger in the bag here, which is that the algorithms now, which are technically PR-wise, they're defined as giving you a seamless scrolling experience, right? You feel good about the stuff you were already believed, and you get some cat pictures and some doggy pictures. That's funny. But they're very close. Now, I would say there's an argument we could make that they have already passed the threshold between bringing something that you can observe into steering and therefore predicting your behavior. These algorithms want you to do stuff. And increasingly, what they want you to do is not just buy 7 toilets or a Mazda or what's a ridiculous thing people buy?
Wheelbarrow.
A wheelbarrow, perfect, or a Fabergé
artisanal Fabergé wheelbarrow.
A Fabergé subscription service for wheelbarrows, eggs,
yes,
and flugelhorns. So those would be my points, at least in response. I think it's not going away. I think it will accelerate, and I don't think at this point I don't think it matters how many people leak information about it.
I think you're absolutely right, Ben, and all those points were fantastic. Matt, I think you were hitting on this point earlier a little bit, and I'd love to hear you follow up. One of the quotes I think was the most telling from Ms. Zhang was this. And by the way, this was not her job specifically to do this. She kind of took it on in her own capacity, or at least expanded the reach, or like the kind of capacity that she was hired to do. And I'm sorry, I'm not getting her actual job title perfectly correct. She is a data scientist. She had something to do with this realm, but she absolutely went above and beyond in writing this memo and in targeting some of these things. And obviously it got her fired. But this is a quote from Zhang that I think really sums up how this stuff is dealt with. It's an open secret within the civic integrity space that Facebook's short-term decisions are largely motivated by PR and the potential for negative attention. And then it goes on to say that her superiors would really only react to these kinds of things after a New York Times piece or a Washington Post piece would be noticed by Facebook leadership. And they'd be like, okay, now we have to do this as an optics kind of move. So people think that we care about this kind of stuff. And then this is the quote that I was talking about. She says, "It's why I've seen priorities of escalations shoot up when others start threatening to go to the press, and why I was informed by a leader in my organization that my civic work was not impactful under the rationale that if the problems were meaningful, they would have attracted attention, became a press fire, and convinced the company to devote more attention to the space." Matt, I see you shaking your head vehemently there. This is like double speak, kind of, isn't it? It's not a problem unless people know it's a problem. It's like some Chernobyl logic,
Yeah, I for sure I can see that. It's just a strange situation because the actors, good or bad, who are utilizing Facebook to put out misinformation or disinformation in these ways, generally in countries that are not the United States or other Western countries. That's some of the biggest things that she's talking about. Like in Honduras, when there's this massive campaign on Facebook to make one candidate look terrible, and it's false information, or at least it's allegedly false information, and it's bad news. Anybody can put that stuff on there. But I don't, as you guys know, just from our working with social media over the years, that anyone can pay for an ad on Facebook and can
That's correct.
Work to get a message out. You can promote a show like this one as much as you want. But if the algorithm isn't behind what you're trying to do and you're not playing it right, and especially if you're not paying for it, it doesn't get much visibility unless there are people clamoring to share that thing. And then, as it says, as one says, it goes viral. It's just weird to me that these messages can even go out there and become so viral that humanity, I guess, all of us together, we still don't, or maybe we've developed this lack of an understanding of something that is factual because of all of these sources of information that we have. I think that's the most troubling part for all of this. Yeah.
We don't have the hardware. We don't have the hardware to adequate, like, information. We say knowledge is power, but what we need to understand when we say that is that it is power in the way that nutritional food is power. I would say information is as important as air, water, and food. And when that's why we talk about eating junk food, right? With the viral memes and all those little dopamine pops when someone reacts to your thoughts online. What I think is inherent here, and I know I'm coming off fairly pessimistic. Again, I'm very much in a bubble because I read a ton of things about this and white papers and so on. We've normalized the existence of this stuff. We've normalized the acceptance of the idea that the world cannot be fully understood. There's just too much happening for any single person to know. So in a way, cognitively, if you have social media accounts, you are a cyborg. There is an assistant, with or without your consent, helping you, kind of pre-chewing your food for you, cutting up your steak, and then just giving it to you a little nibber nub at a time.
How does it feel to know you're a little baby bird, Noel? Getting fed your information pre-chewed.
It's weirdly comforting, and my mommy loves me very much. So, yeah.
Okay.
Creepy though.
So I would ask you guys, what do you think this means for the future? That's to me, that's the most important question. What does this mean for the future of we're in a post-factual society. There's no two ways about it. We're at what Fukuyama called the end of history in some ways. Like, what do you think Facebook or its replacement will be like 8 years from now? Let's make it scary. What do you think it'll be like 5 years from now?
Well, one thing that the social dilemma pointed out that I think we've certainly discussed, and it occurred to me, but they do it in a really eloquent, straightforward way, is that, like, our brains aren't really going to evolve in 8 years. Probably not in 80 years, probably not in 100 years. We're kind of hit a wall as far as that's concerned. But you know what does evolve exponentially? Computing power. The power of these algorithms. So they're just going to keep getting better and better and better. They're going to be better at predicting our behavior and in gaming our brains, because our brains are dumb compared to, like, these algorithms. They've kind of been able to outsmart us already, hence the effectiveness in being able to manipulate these elections just by targeting us with, like, things that appeal to our worst nature and that aren't true. That's the whole point. Maybe we buried the lead. A lot of these stories that we're talking about are what real fake news is, where they're essentially stories that are put out there that people share because it appeals to something they already believe and it makes them feel good about that opinion, so they push it out. And it's happening right now with people saying, targeting places like Puerto Rico, who are very uncomfortable with the idea of communism, and they're putting out ads saying Joe Biden's a communist. Is that true? Is it completely slanderous, or is, maybe he says things that are a little on the communist tip, but that's the kind of stuff that they're doing. They're targeting people's biases and they're hitting people where they live, which is on the damn internet.
Yeah, it's tough, because where do you look for that non-snackable, more nourishing news and facts, right?
This should bother a lot of us conspiracy realists. Your ability to learn objectively is being heavily influenced, but you are not powerless in this endeavor. You have agency in this situation. The inundation of media and information is, as I've said numerous times, much more than the human brain evolved or was designed, however you want to say it, to handle, right? So think about it this way. think about a graph, an X and a Y axis. Right now, what's happening is the average person with an internet connection has what I would call a first paragraph of Wikipedia depth of understanding about many, many, many things. And that's not a ding. Back in the days of the Middle Ages, you were a literary lion. You were a giant of knowledge if you knew just a little bit about so many things. Now with social media, everybody's like that person. Our breadth of knowledge is larger than it may have been at any other single point in human history as a species. However, that comes at a sacrifice of our depth of knowledge, our deep learning. And that's something I think, Matt, you and I have been pretty clear about ever since the YouTube days. You have the power. You have the power to go beyond that Facebook post. You have the power to go beyond that 3-minute, 5-minute spot on the evening news. You can learn deeply. You, out of all the living things on the planet, if you were listening and you were human, and if you're AI and listening, you're even better at this, you have the ability to just spend an hour reading contradictory sources and determine the truth for yourself. Because as our boy Fox Mulder always said, it's out there.
Bro, you're like arming all this AI with the knowledge that they could continue their deep learning until they know everything better than anything else, dude. You just started the singularity.
Oh man.
Oh no.
Oh, it's
about time. It's about time, you know.
At the end of history, at least we'll have the clickbait to keep us warm.
Ah, yes, we will. Like the clickbait that you would usually find on BuzzFeed. And it's not a ding on BuzzFeed. It's just their business model. It's the way they grew up and became a big company. But, you know, there's this other thing called BuzzFeed News that I personally have never given much thought about, you know, as in believing that it's a reputable news source. In the beginning, I didn't, just because I knew what BuzzFeed was, or I thought I did, right?
Listicles. Didn't they make up that word?
Yeah, just things that are like, hey, look at this. Just click some for over here for a while.
14 ways to take care of your feet. Shoe stores hate numbers 9.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
I mean, that's really what I thought all of BuzzFeed was, because again, it kind of was. But with BuzzFeed News, our next story, it comes from them, and it began from them because there were documents sent to them. And they didn't work alone, but we'll tell you all about what they uncovered after a quick word from our sponsor. And we're back. As we teased beforehand, this is a story that comes from us via BuzzFeed News and several other players, including the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Now, that's a name that makes you go, oh, there's got to be facts in there somewhere.
Yeah, it gives you a lot more. It definitely lends itself more to the idea of credibility than BuzzFeed News. But we got to stop ragging on BuzzFeed News. You're right, Matt. I thought the same, and they really do some seriously legit reporting.
You guys have to stop ragging on BuzzFeed News. I remember back in the YouTube days one time, I don't know if you remember this, Matt, I was going through the same crisis of research faith. And I remember saying, Matt, should we tell people that one of the sources for this is a report from BuzzFeed? Because we're already a conspiracy show.
Well, I think it speaks to our biases and the bubbles that we find ourselves in, and first impressions. Honestly, it speaks to all of those things. But yeah, props where it is deserved. Good on you, BuzzFeed News. Mm-hmm. So it's a story. I'm going to read you some reporting that was done by the International Business Times on the story that was broke by BuzzFeed and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Okay, here we go. Report. Global banks, including HSBC, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, have laundered trillions in illicit cash.
I'm sorry, trillions?
Trillions in illicit cash. Now, the first thought that you likely have, as Ben and Nolan and I had, was, yeah, of course, I know that. Come on. Of course, banks are laundering money. The second thought is, hey, you know what? I've even heard you guys specifically talk about that. And that one bank you mentioned, HSBC, and all the laundering that they did for drug cartels back in the day.
Well,
and
Deutsche Bank too, though. Deutsche Bank's been on that list for sure.
And Deutsche Bank and Wachovia, which is now Wells Fargo, and all of the other banks. And they always get their hands smacked a little bit, and then they go right back to it. And that is the big story here. All of the banks have been doing it. They get their hands slapped and they keep doing it. And it's a process that just starts and stops and starts and stops and starts and stops, and it continues on forever. There are a ton of details that were brought forth from a leak of documents that came to us from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. You're going to see that all over the place if you haven't already been seeing that. FIN, capital CEN. And these leaked documents that got out there, and specifically got to BuzzFeed News, they detail essentially strange transactions, or transactions that have been marked by one of these banking institutions as possibly suspicious. And that doesn't mean that there's anything necessarily nefarious going on with any single transaction, but these are at least internally marked, right? And then it's up to the bank essentially to check that stuff out and then report it if they feel it is necessary.
Right. The foxes must report the weekly massacre of the hen houses they guard, or quarterly, rather, I would say. Important point. Just to be clear, FinCEN is not an independent agency. It is a part of the U.S. Treasury Department.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I hope I didn't characterize it in that way, but yeah, it's a thing. It's a network within the Treasury, and they all say, well, you boys and girls over there in the banking industry, you play nice, and if you see anything weird, send it our way and we'll check it out. And when that happens, doesn't necessarily mean that any action is going to be taken to stop these transactions or further transactions from the same players that are making these suspicious transactions.
Maybe this is a silly question or irrelevant, but like, where does the IRS figure into all this? Like, I fear an audit if I like overclaim stuff on my taxes. Like, if I try to write too much off, I'm going to get flagged. Where do they figure into this whole mess? And you'd think with that much money, it would be just an instantly red flag if there wasn't just serious obfuscation going on by the banks to hide these transactions.
Well, most of this is international, but yeah, doesn't mean that the IRS isn't going to be involved with a lot of this, because there are people like, JP Morgan. Well, JP Morgan operating out of Malaysia with the Malaysia Sovereign Wealth Fund, like JP Morgan transferring funds, Venezuela, Ukraine, Malaysia, having to do with the looting of the public funds in those states, those countries. I mean, there's that. So that's happening. There's all kinds of things. Again, the set of documents, I think, is 2,000 something documents. Yeah, 2,100 documents. There's so many weird transactions happening all over the world with all of these varying banks in varying capacities and in varying levels of wrongdoing, or what may be wrongdoing. One of the only ones occurring in the United States that I was looking at least in depth, had to do with Paul Manafort, President Trump's former campaign manager. There's several $50 million that JP Morgan processed for Paul Manafort, and then 6.9 million that got moved around by JP Morgan on behalf of Manafort after he quit the campaign. I mean, that's just an interesting thing. I don't know exactly what it means. It doesn't mean he did anything wrong with it, but he was under investigation for some other stuff having to do with money.
In a court of law.
a lot of smoke.
Convicted of that.
A lot of smoke there, boys.
He also has some connections. He's got some Russian connections there. Some Eastern European stuff. This does provide some compelling circumstantial evidence of shady backdoor deals, right? From cleaning out the public funds. It also...
Well, I'm sorry, Ben, really quick. When you say public funds, is that the same as like taking our tax dollars that are like held in escrow or something and literally funneling them into other things? Or what does that mean exactly?
Embezzling.
But when you say public funds,
right, embezzling public funds, like, you could say tax base. So, for instance, let's say you're an oligarch in Russia, and you not only do you can take all the money you want, right? If you are friends with your other oligarchs, taking advantage of the vulnerable is something this species does for fun, even when it doesn't benefit us. So you can take all that money from the public funds, but the real trick, the real smooth operators play the Sade in the background and then find ways to move it through increasingly legitimate avenues. These are the suspicious activity reports that I think you're referring to, Matt.
Got it.
The SARS.
Thank you.
Yeah,
yes,
and
they are SARS.
It's the kind of SARS you want to catch. And this also brings us to the question about the IRS. It brings us to the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970 here in the US. And that act has a lot of loopholes. It's got more loops than a roller coaster. But if it actually works, it is meant to obligate financial institutions in the US to assist Uncle Sam in detecting and preventing money laundering. However, anybody who has a cursory familiarity with the halls of power and with Congress knows that many members of Congress, I'll say it, it's fine, they are disincentivized from approaching money laundering because it is very hard to find a fox guarding a hen house that will point the finger or the paw at itself. It is a very dirty game. Like these leaks, obviously, some of us listening are instantly reminded of the Panama Papers, right?
Yep.
Peep behind the curve, folks. We went off air so we could remember the name of the primary institution involved in the Panama Papers. And after several increasingly Seussian guesses in our brainstorming, we arrived at Mossack Fonseca, which is the correct thing. What happened there? Well, I believe, correct me, I'm trying to remember the right leak here, Matt and Noel, but I believe that the big takeaway from that was the assassination of the journalist involved in breaking this story. Yeah, it's right. Karuna Galizia was murdered. So if I were involved in this current leak, FinCEN, as we're still dealing with the fallout, I don't know. I would be very careful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in that one, it was individuals. This one also deals with some individuals, some groups, such as terrorist organizations. But in the Panama Papers case, it was individual human beings, offshore transactions that were supposed to be private and secret.
And not necessarily illegal, right? Ostensibly. Yeah.
Yeah. But it still showed big chunks of money getting moved around by individual humans that they didn't want you to know about.
Oh, we have to do an episode on this.
Yeah. This is a whole episode, you guys.
HSBC, though, for years, for the better part of a decade, we've been using that to point to actual conspiracies, not conspiracy theories. This is the bank, longtime listeners, that specifically reconstructed their teller windows to accept large deposits from drug cartels.
It's true. God, I remember that. Oh, and let's not forget, guys. It kind of went under the radar for us. I think we mentioned it back in the day. It was right towards the tail end of our major video era, where Standard Chartered, a bank in, I believe, the UK. Is that correct? Standard Chartered, a large bank. In 2012, they were accused of conspiring with Iran for a decade to move $250 billion in secret transactions. And they were also found to be linked with a couple other groups that appear to have been financing terrorist acts in Israel and other places. I mean, these are, we're naming these banks off: HSBC, Standard Chartered, JP Morgan. We've mentioned Wachovia. We've done episodes on them, how they were just doing terrible things, laundering money for drug cartels too. It's insane. And in this case, we've got a ton of stuff to go through thanks to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and BuzzFeed News. So what I would do is recommend everyone goes to icij.org and check out the giant article titled Global Banks Defy U.S. Crackdowns by Serving Oligarchs, Criminals, and Terrorists. Look through it. Digest what you can. There is a lot there. And very soon, Ben, I'm looking at you specifically for this. Very soon, we'll come back with a deep dive into this topic.
Yeah, that's our plan.
Okay.
It's unfortunate because it is a developing story, so we run the risk of something new happening, but we'll just cover it in a breaking update, depending on who gets killed.
We'll get 2 to 5 episodes.
Has this been like blasted across the cable news networks and stuff? I don't know. Like I don't have cable, so like I couldn't tell you. I haven't seen Last Week Tonight yet, but I imagine this is a big story. Yeah,
It's very recent.
Yeah,
it broke yesterday, I believe. At least, the major players broke it. Yeah, on September 20th, 2020.
And I had seen some, this is weird, but I know this makes me sound sketchy, but I had seen some kind of rumblings or rumors or speculation as early as September 17th. But to me, that only means that someone with knowledge of the upcoming publication knew. When stuff like this breaks in the public sphere, that usually means for several months, if not years, people have been quietly investigating it. And it's a huge gamble to take. I mean, journalists get a hard time, right? But they are some of the hardest working people on this planet. And often they are the most imperiled. So be nice to your journalist friends.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get paid what they should. And they're doing this for you, not for their egos. I would hope.
That's really good. The other big story just to come out of this, and we'll be done here, is that the stock prices for a lot of these banks they've just been hammered as of right now because of this story, which doesn't always happen.
Time for a bailout. I mean, imagine that you clearly break the law as an individual and you get hit with a fine, but not jail time. And then you say, oh, that fine's a lot. And then the government comes in and says, how much money do you need? That's what's happening.
Right. Like, I mean, even with the HSBC thing, like where they literally admitted to laundering close to $1 billion for drug cartels, not to be repetitive. I think they paid about $2 billion in fines to avoid being, having to essentially have any real consequences outside of, paying money. Not that that's not a lot of money, but you think about how much money they make over the long term. It's sort of pennies. And then it turns out as part of this leak that they have been doing business with Russian organized crime. Again, well, again, I mean, they're not Latin American drug cartels, but they're still doing illegal stuff in a very real way because there's really no holding these folks accountable, and there's so much money to be made from people who are very, very wealthy and who don't want that milk to stop flowing, from the. Okay, I'm going to stop that image there, but they don't want it to stop. It's not in their best interest to like follow up on this. To your point, Ben, the fox pointing the finger at the other fox or themselves. Maybe you'll point at another fox if it's your competitive fox and you want that fox out of your hen house so you can eat all the hens. But even then, we've talked about, even when we were on Harmontown, how that doesn't happen. You don't really see people that are at that level going to war with each other because they're all kind of in the same echelon and they're all benefiting off of each other in a weird, symbiotic, parasitic relationship.
Incestuous, I would add. I'll say it. But also we have to remember, I'll take pains to make this clear, what appear to be distinctions between many of these institutions, criminal and financial, the things that appear to be distinct entities, in the local news, those distinctions are often pageantry. Past a certain financial threshold, they are very much like subsidiaries of a larger thing. And I know that feels conspiratorial, and perhaps it is, but it also has the benefit of being factual.
It's Bogus, Bunce, and Bean, everybody. That's all you need to know. That's what it is.
Is that a Harry Potter reference?
No, it's Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Oh, got it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's
Close.
ridiculous, though. I mean, we have to do an episode on this because we have to ask ourselves why this leak comes about, when it comes about. We have to ask ourselves what, if any, consequences will occur, because these entities will go about on their merry way. It's not, and we're not saying, of course, like, I was thinking about this. I wanted to be fair to every side involved. Think about the possible C-level executives at an international bank who don't want to go along with this, but realize that their bosses are heavy in with drug cartels or oligarchs. And, it can very quickly go past the idea of, oh no, my job's on the line, to holy crap, they know where my children live. And I know that sounds alarmist, but that is very true. And
Yikes,
just think,
dude.
yeah, it's true. So think about this. Think about, like, just to let you know how unfair the situation is in the eyes of the law in the West and abroad. Let's go back to that example of how the consequences of your actions differ if you are a bank. If you're a bank, you go to court and, you say, Your Honor, while I do not admit wrongdoing in the unfortunate death of blah, 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 or the theft of yada, 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 I do agree, in the interest of saving everybody time, I do agree to $1 billion fine. And also, I would like to file a motion, Your Honor, for you to pay that $1 billion fine, because if I'm too big to fail, am I not too big to jail? You know what I mean? Like, that logic is spooky and it works.
Yeah. The other spooky logic here is put yourself in the position of being a company that literally sells money, essentially. I mean, that's what your company is, right? You bring in money so that you can lend out money, and that's it. And you've got a bunch of nameless, faceless individuals, which is the case. It's in the case of a lot of these, it's people who are trying to put money into the bank, into a specific banking system. They don't have a name identity associated with them, but they're trying to make massive deposits into the bank. And why would you say no to that? Because you want to be a good person? I mean, I hope that we would say no to that, right? But in the end, the system itself needs that kind of influx of $1 million here, $20 million there, $1 billion over here, in order to continue functioning with their pinkies in their mouths. I mean, it's just, it all makes me feel gross. And you know what? I can't wait to talk about it further.
Yes. Oh, yes. So we are keeping an eye on this, and I think what we've shared here should hopefully overall be somewhat inspiring, because social dilemma aside, technology outpacing evolution aside, what we have to remember is that this is information. This feeds us, and this can help us make more informed, more prescient decisions in the future. I think, to your point, Noel, I think there are going to be more Facebook leaks. To your point, Matt, I think this is just the beginning of the FinCEN corruption story and the leaks. And I don't know if we're going to find any living thing on Venus. But
in the clouds.
Right, in the clouds. But if we do, how cool would it be? One thing's for sure, we are going to be back with more strange news very soon, and we want your help. We want to hear from you. What do you think about Facebook leaks? Do you want to tell us on our Facebook page? Because of course we have one. What do you think about FinCEN? Do you work at a bank? What's your perspective on this? Is this just COB as a cost of doing business? Are we being too precious about the law as it's written? And what do you think about Venus? What do you think the fallout is? Does it matter if we find life on another planet? Is it just a cool merit badge?
Does it warrant a rename? What do you think? Let us know. You can reach out to us in the ways that Ben said, via the Facebook group, which is here's where it gets crazy. You can do it on the social medias, pretty much every social media that you can think of, where we are Conspiracy Stuff or Conspiracy Stuff Show. Why not give us a call? Leave us a voicemail. You want to tell them about that, Matt?
Sure. Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. Pick up your phone, call it right now. Say whatever you want. If you've got some cool input that's going to change our minds about something or is going to send us down a rabbit hole, that's probably your best option. Or, if you're just going to make us laugh because everybody needs that right now, please feel free to do so.
But be sure and let us know if you don't want us to use your name, or if you're just in general cool with us using your voicemail on the show, or if you are okay with us using it, but you'd rather us not use your name. Just be specific so that we know how to respectfully deal with your audio nugget that you leave us. And if you're down, you might hear it on an episode of our weekly listener mail segment.
Yes, so please leave us your audio nuggets. We can't wait to go through them. They don't want to do those things. How else can they reach out to us?
We have one way to reach out to us 24/7, no matter what time of day it is, no matter where you are on or off the planet. You can send us a good old-fashioned email where we are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.